Okay.
Hey, welcome to the our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting tonight with Lee Lowenfish. Today is April 7th, 2026. Lee will be talking about the Fordham Flash, Frankie Frisch. Just a couple of other things. Next week, we will have our meeting on Thursday with Dennis Snelling. Dennis wrote a book about the 1950 Whiz Kids. Of course, that's Philadelphia, but he's intertwining a lot of Giant stuff in there, New York Giant stuff. So it should be a very interesting meeting. The only thing I got to add, I made this bogus post on April Fool's Day
Oh,
on
that's
Facebook,
great.
and most of the people understood, but there were others who were, nasty and, I don't
Nasty.
understand. Yeah, it was, because the renderings of the stadium were actually really they were good looking.
That's
They were
great.
great. So anyway, actually I got a couple of phone calls asking me if it was true. So
I
maybe
was looking to
one
buy
other.
tickets, Gary.
I'm
It
sorry.
was
I
brilliant.
was looking to buy tickets.
It was
Anyway,
brilliant.
Lee, besides being a great baseball historian, he has another claim to fame that he probably does not remember. Many years ago, when we were first starting, Lee got on my case. And he said, "Why are you doing Google Meets in here? You should be doing Zooms." So I heeded Lee's advice, and we started Zooms after Lee yelled at me. So thanks, Lee.
Well, I don't remember at
Oh,
all.
I remember everything, Lee.
All right.
Anyway, Lee, it's great to have you. Let's all welcome Lee Lowenfish. Lee, the floor is yours.
Well, it's really wonderful to be here, and it turns out moving this to April 7th was very heartwarming for me because my father would have been 128 today, and I became a Giant fan because it was his team, and he grew up on the same block where the Marx Brothers lived. 93rd Street between Lexington and 3rd, I believe it was, maybe Lexington and Park. And the Marx Brothers were a big fan. I picked up my love of them from my father. Harpo was the biggest baseball fan in the group. And uh, are you still seeing me?
Yeah, you look good.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've got these things really. All right. So, this talk today is an outgrowth of the talk I gave a year ago at the Cooperstown Symposium about Frankie Frisch, because I think he's been totally forgotten, and I had a personal connection with him. In the 50s, we had our first color TV, and I would turn on Frankie Frisch after the game in the mid 50s. And he immediately uh, caught my attention. All those bases on balls, he would complain about pitchers who didn't throw strikes. And you can't let the Humpty Dumptys beat you, meaning you can't let bad hitters beat you. On a nicer thought, he said that we, if you look good when you get pitching. I was disturbed though when I read in August of 1956 that he had a heart attack, and he was going to be in the hospital for, as it turned out, for over 6 weeks. But I was reassured when I read that the first thing he said when he came to in the hospital is
This meeting is being recorded.
for first thing he said when he came to in the hospital is, "What were the scores of the games last night?" We fast forward now. Uh, I'm in between teaching jobs. I'm up in Rhode Island in the summer of 1969. I walk in to give my kitten shots. You have him get shots, and who's in this vet's office but Frankie Frisch putting one of his beloved dogs to sleep? We still begin to bond. I mean, he's just like he appears on TV. He's gruff, but he's genial. I tell him uh, I'm thinking about writing on sports, although I'm still very much in academia. He says, try Sports Illustrated. They're a good outfit. you know. And then we say goodbye. Uh, Less than 4 years later, I read that he's been in a serious automobile accident on I-90 near in Delaware, and he's in a hospital with multiple injuries. I and many others, including President Richard Nixon, sent him get well notes. But alas, he never gets out of the hospital, and he dies on early March in 1973 at the age of 75. Now, uh, as I grow up and get to grad school and then teach and do freelancing, I ask myself, why is he forgotten? I mean, look at the man's career. I mean, he won four straight World Series with the Giants, or he played in four straight series from 21 to 24, won two of them. Then he was traded to St. Louis for Rogers Hornsby, and he wins four more. He plays in four more World Series, winning two, including the Gas House Gang Series uh, in 34, where he's the player manager. Now, I think part of the reason that we don't know much about him is that after that Gas House Gang World Series, he never again managed the World Series. And he became a broadcaster for a while, wrote strong articles about the good old days were better, but he argued well those cases. And so what I want to do tonight is to talk a bit about his career and why I think he's still very important. And I'm glad to be, telling this story. I mean, look at his career. He had a 316 career average, and it wasn't quite musial like, but he was a switch hitter, and he hit 318 left-handed and 309 right-handed. He had 2880 hits, almost had 3,000 hits. He said in reflection later that if he hadn't been a player manager, having to be responsible for the Gas House Gang and other players, and then also in Pittsburgh and briefly in Chicago, he would have had 3,000 and might be better known. But he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1947. 136 out of 162 votes, and in the company of Lefty Grove, Mickey Cochran, and Carl Hubble, all of whom he competed with or against, or managed against Hubble. So let me tell you the story of Frisch because he was a New Yorker. He was born in Ozone Park, Queens, and the family moved to Bedford Park, Perry Street to be exact, 3211 Perry Street, when he was a youngster. He was a gifted athlete in all sports, and his father, Franz Frisch, was born in Frankfurt, Germany, but came to New York in the 1880s. His father was a prominent lace and linen importer, and he knew that his son, his middle son, was a great athlete, and he encouraged it, and he sponsored local teams. But he dreamed that Frank would go into the family business.
Want to pass away?
All right, can you hear me? Okay, I'm getting all. I'm all right. You'll let me know if you can't hear me because I can't see anybody right now. Um, so Frank goes to Fordham Prep, and at Fordham Prep, he becomes the nickname the Fordham Flash. And like Jackie Robinson, a quarter century later in LA and Pasadena, baseball was not really Frisch's best sport. He ran track, he ran the 100 in around 10 seconds, and college coaches dreamed of making him one of the great runners in the country. He was a great football player and a star basketball player. He goes to Fordham, from Fordham Prep to Fordham University in 1916. Uh, and this is the time of World War One, and he doesn't get drafted because of a bad heart. So he continues to play. He briefly tries working on Wall Street, but that's not for him. So he goes to Fordham, and in 1918 he has such a good year as a Fordham player that in football actually, that Walter Camp names him to the second team All-American as a halfback. Very rare for somebody from the Northeast who was not an Ivy Leaguer to get on that All-American team. In 1919, after the college season is over, he goes down to Baltimore to play in an exhibition game against the Baltimore Orioles, owned by Jack Dunn. All he does in that game is hit two doubles and a triple and another hit. Jack Dunn wants to sign him after the game for the Orioles. His father is with him, and Franz Frisch doesn't like Baltimore and really doesn't want his son to go into pro baseball. I think part of the reason was his oldest son, died of injuries occurred in a Sandlot game. It was listed as appendicitis, but it was also um, uh, intensified by injuries in a football game. But come June 1919, uh, John McGraw gives an offer to the Frisches that they can't turn down. He will come immediately to the big leagues to John McGraw's um, team. He will become one of a handful of players to never play in the minor leagues. George Sisler being one of them, and Jack Combs and many others, or several others, and less than a dozen. And he gets a contract that will be a 2-year contract, and with a stipulation that if he doesn't make the team in 2 years,
about it. Yeah.
it's voided. So the you're hearing me all right, because I can't see anything right now.
Yeah,
But
fine.
okay, fine. All right. So he comes in, and John McGraw becomes his second father in effect, and McGraw likes the competitiveness of Frisch.
I'm gonna do a search on YouTube.
And
Lee, excuse me a second. Could everybody please mute themselves? It is so rude to the speaker. I'm sorry, Lee.
no, it's all right. It's all, I can't see myself, but
You look great.
all right. I'm
You
glad.
sound great. Okay,
All
go.
right. No, I love this story, and I'm glad that people want to relive it with me, because it's, I mean, history, especially at a time we're living through now, is something to cherish, because if it happened once, call me a naive fool, it might happen again. So, and there's nothing wrong with being a naive fool. Okay, so he comes to the Giants, and by 1921, he's the captain of the Giants. And McGraw is very spare in praise, but he does tell Frisch, he says, "Kid, if you learn to think on your feet, I think you'll be a pretty good ball player." And who becomes one of his teammates during this period from 21 to 24,
Never,
when they're in
unbelievable.
the World Series 4 years in a row, but Casey Stengel. They and Frisch is such a dervish as a second baseman that he Stengel marveled. He said, I mean, he outran the ball. He didn't just go in the hole. He was like a sprinter going in the hole, and he managed to get the ball to first in time. You have to realize another thing about Frisch is that because of football and baseball injuries and bad um, bad doctors back then, he actually became a Hall of Fame second baseman with only two good fingers on his throwing hands. In fact, when I met him that day in the vet's office, I was bold enough to ask him about his fingers, because they were gnarled, And I said, you're not a catcher. How did that happen? And he says, we didn't have doctors back then. We had night watchmen. So despite that, he became a player of such stature that he was being compared to Ty Cobb. In fact, he played an exhibition against Ty Cobb in which Cobb stole second, knocked the glove off Frisch's hand, went to third, and later after the game says, "Kid, get the ball out of your glove as soon as possible." And he always remembered that, positively. So we have him now playing for the Giants. They beat the Yankees in 21 and 22. 23 Yankee Stadium is built. And John McGraw, who always said that Hornsby for the Cardinals is better player than Babe Ruth, um, McGraw doesn't is so arrogant about the new Yankee Stadium that he dresses the Giants in the Polo Grounds so they can then they can walk over to Yankee Stadium, and they expect to win. Of course, the 23 begins this first year of a Yankee dynasty because the Yankees win. In 24, they lose to the Senators. In 25, they're not in the series at all, or in 26. In fact, in 26, Frisch, who dealt with arthritis throughout his career and his later life, was so hurt, it was so bothered by injuries, and didn't like McGraw picking on him as the captain for mental errors. He actually bolted the team in August of 26, went back to New York, and it was only owner Charles Stoneham of the Yankees, of the Giants, and National League President John Heidler who told McGraw reinstate him. So he comes back a week later, but he doesn't talk to McGraw now for a few years. And by the end of the season, the rumors are flying that Frisch is going to be traded, and it may be Hornsby coming to New York. And that is indeed what happens. The Giants fans, since Hornsby was already having the reputation as the greatest right-handed hitter ever in baseball, the fans think it's a good trade. St. Louis fans are up in arms. I mean, Hornsby had just player managed the Cardinals to the World Series win, and he's a local hero. And when they find out he's going to New York, uh, season's tickets are canceled. The Chamber of Commerce wants the owner, Sam Braden, hung an effigy, and it looks bad. And so Frisch knows that he's got very big shoes to fill. So he goes up to New Hampshire. I'm sorry, to Lake Placid with his wife, who is another story that I want to get into in further work. His childhood sweetheart. They go up and spend the winter in Lake Placid, and he gets into the best shape of his life. He skis. He skis. He skateboards. He even goes on a one of those things that were in the Olympics, and I don't skate, so I can't. He even takes a ride out with a guy named No Brakes Johnson, but he doesn't get injured. He also learns to hunt up there, just because he loves being in the outdoors. And so he gets to St. Louis and he arrives, and none of the Cardinals speak to him for the first week. They thought I was a hoodlum from New York. But once they see what kind of player he is, that ice is broken. And he has the greatest year I think a second baseman ever had, at least defensively. He broke Lajoie's assist record, and I think it's still held. And um, uh, they don't win the pennant, but it's very close second in a very tough 1927 race that is won by the Pirates, who get swept by the Yankees in the 27 season. So now we have him in um, in St. Louis. And they get back to the World Series in 1928, but the Yankees sweep them too. Uh, in 29, uh, it's the beginning of the long forgotten and should be remembered, the Connie Mack three-peat from 29, 30, and 31. For those Yankee fans who think that they have a license to be win every year, this was really a down period for them, despite Babe Ruth. Mack will win the World Series in 29 over the Cubs, 30 over the Cardinals, and then 31 they're going for a three-peat. And uh, the gestation of the Gas House Gang is going to come in 31 because Pepper Martin, John Leonard Pepper Martin from the wide open spaces of Oklahoma runs wild in the 1931 World Series, and they beat the A's and Frisch actually called the 1931 team the best team he ever was involved with. Why? Because they worked hard on their what they didn't do well. And that would be something that was a touchstone in his life as a manager and then as a broadcaster and as an intelligent curmudgeon. You got to work at what you don't do well. So in 32 and 33, the Cardinals are out of the money. And all owner Sam Brayton, who did the managerial hiring and firing with Branch Rickey, sometimes agreeing and sometimes not agreeing. Frisch is asked in 1933, in the middle of the season, to replace Gabby Street as manager. I mean, Street, who's a fascinating character in his own right. I mean, he was a sergeant in World War I, and his nickname was Sarge, and he was a playful guy, and somebody who actually supported women's baseball as well. But he had lost the team, and so Frisch takes over in 33, and starting in 34, we have the maybe the high point of Frisch's career, certainly as player manager. He manages the Gas House Gang, and what a team that was. They had Pepper Martin, who could play third base or center field, and was such a free spirit that he would come into spring training in Florida, hopping freights. And when he would stop at a hotel, he would sign Pretty Boy Floyd as his name. Uh, then you have Joe Medwick, the slugger from Carteret, New Jersey, who uh, was a great football prospect. And Newt Rockne wanted him at Notre Dame. But when Newt was killed in that plane crash, Medwick reportedly decided, well, baseball will be my future. Now, Medwick was a great right-handed left fielder, but he basically wanted to play, the way he put it was, I play for base hits and buccarinos. He hated the nickname Ducky, but it was given to him when he was in the minor leagues in Houston. And he had a ferocious temper, and sometimes he and another one of this Gas House Gang, Dizzy Dean, would actually get into fights. But when it was time to play, the Frisch was able to get them together, and they wound up winning a tremendous World Series over the Tigers. Frisch getting it the game win hit, bases loaded double in Game 7 in Detroit in the third inning, and Dean pitched a shutout, 11-0. I mean, that's the game that Medwick got slid hard into Marv Owen, the Tiger third baseman. And as Frisch wrote in his unpublished memoir and in his published one, he didn't think Medwick's slide was that bad, but Marv Owen was disappointed how badly the Tigers were losing, and they started swinging. As a result, in the next half inning, Medwick went out to left field at then called Briggs Stadium, or maybe it was still called Navin Field, and people started throwing all kinds of refuse at and produce. I talked to Charlie Gehringer once, and he said, "I don't know where they got all that food from." I mean, Frisch said that Medwick looked like he had been it looked like an incinerator after people had thrown the stuff on him. Commissioner Landis calls a special meeting by his box, and he rules that Medwick has to leave the game. And Medwick is incensed because he was on his way to tying or breaking a World Series hit record. And, base hits and buccarinos were his theme. Frisch wanted a compromise, move him to right field, and because there was not a big stand in right field, and so the fans couldn't throw the fruit and vegetables across the outfield. But Landis, when he made a decision, it was his way or the highway. Well, after that, and this partly may be a reason for Frisch's forgottenness in terms of writers and historian. I mean, he never got back to a World Series again, but he stayed managing the Cardinals into 1938. They were in the race in 35, but the Cubs won 21 in a row in the September of 35. In 36 was the Giants and the Yankees going back in 36, 37, more Subway Series. And so Frisch, by 1938, actually, here's a story that there was always stories around those characters. In spring training 37, there was a bad omen for the Cardinals because during spring training, there was a ruckus in the hotel in St. Petersburg. And Dizzy Dean's wife, who we always called Mom, and she was older than him and was a very canny businesswoman. She almost instigated it because there was a roly-poly New York Daily News sports writer named Jack Miley who had taken on Dizzy Dean for all his salary squabbles, and he said, and you haven't won that much. And so Pat Dean says, "Hey, there's that guy who's been writing those bad things about you." Well, one thing leads to another. The Cardinals are down there, and Frisch gets hit into some potted palms in the lobby. And finally he comes up and he says, "This is no way to prepare for the season." And then of course later in the season during the All-Star game, Dizzy Dean gets hit with the left foot by Earl Averill, and he's knocked out. He had just given up a home run to Gehrig, incidentally, so he was very, one bad thing after another. And both Frisch and both Pat Dean were so sad that Dizzy rushed back 10 days later to pitch against the Braves. I mean, the owner wanted him to, maybe Branch Rickey wanted him to, but the worst thing was that he was such a competitor that he did rush back and he got hurt. He hurt his arm. This classic injury story. You hurt one part of your body, you get you favor other parts of your body, and he was never the same after he came back too soon. Then the next year, Frisch is let go, and he comes back to New York, where he had never really left, and as his off-season home, and he becomes an announcer for the Boston Braves and the Red Sox. and he reunites with Casey Stengel there, who is having problems getting winning teams managing the Braves. In 1940, the call of uniform is too great, and he winds up going to Pittsburgh, and he'll manage for the next 7 years for owner William Benswager, and he'll have a contender, but now and then, but he will never have a real shot at the pennant. He was there in 46, his last year, and uh, he encouraged the bringing up of the rookie Ralph Kiner, who of course emerged as their one big star in the next few years. Uh, but after 46, he lives through the strike that almost happened of the players. And in 47, he comes back to the Giants as a broadcaster. And then the next year, when Leo comes in that dramatic switch of managers in the early summer of 48, he becomes a coach for Leo. And of course, DeRocher was on DeRocher was on the Cardinals and was the shortstop and was a key part of that Gas House gang. So he uh, he's with the Giants in uniform, and then the Cubs come after the 48 season, ask him to be the Cub manager. Mrs. Frisch, Ada Lucy Frisch, and a lot of friends says you don't want to do that job because the Cubs don't have players. And as Frisch later admitted, it's very hard to manage a ball club, when there's so many hangers-on around the team, and that is time immemorial to the 20 to the middle of this century. So that will be his last. He's fired in the 51 season, and that's when he comes back to New York. And that's when he gets into broadcasting, and he never really cracks the major leagues of broadcasting, but he does get gigs, and he wants to be part of the action. I mean, he's well to do. I mean, and he indulges in his wonderful hobbies of classical music. He becomes friends of a lot um, of musicians, especially child prodigies, which in a way he was in athletic terms. You know, Leonard Pinario, Eugene Isterman, who was a huge Tiger fan, and Emil Gilels. And this is something I really want to dig more into. And the story is that he would, an average day in Frank Frisch's life when he's back here in New York after in the off season, and then when he's no longer in uniform, is he'd go to the New York Athletic Club uh, on 58th and 7th, 59th. He would do 3 times a week, would do his gym exercise, and then go to Carnegie Hall, most often with the sports editor of the New York Times in this period, Raymond J. Kelly. Now, the part of Frisch, though, is that I want to talk to before it's time for questions, is that his broadcasting, as I say, was on minor outlets, but he did do, uh, he worked with Jack Whitaker on the backup game of the week for CBS from 59 to 61. And in a wonderful memoir that Whitaker wrote with this, and Whitaker lived till 2019. This book came out in 1999. I love this title, Preferred Lies and Other Tales. He has 4 or 5 pages about what it was like to uh, to be with Frank Frisch, even if they weren't on the air. But he spent time in ballparks, mainly in Shibe Park in Philly, Memorial Stadium, Baltimore, and Yankee Stadium. And there's this passage where um, Frank had utter disdain for the player who did not hustle all the time, the player who didn't run out every ground ball or chase every foul fly. He didn't like a player who didn't love baseball with the same intensity he did. Most of the players in the early 60s didn't like to hear Frisch talk about hustling and how it was back in the 1930s. But Frank was a hero to many others. I often arrived at the ballpark, whether it was Yankee Stadium, Shibe, or Memorial Stadium, to find the Flash holding court in the stands behind home plate for the ushers and the vendors. He would regale them with his stories and opinions, and they loved him. He also, when he was doing this gig that didn't provide much airtime, he also did some remarkable short, I guess they'd call it the modules, 2 minute sports commentaries, and and they're wonderful. Mainly 1960. Don Carter, the bowler, who was a minor league player in Class D, but knew bowling was best. And fortunately, because he traveled all the time, his wife Laverne Carter was also a bowler. Then he talks about Ted Atkinson, who learned to horse ride in Prospect Park. He studied classics, but he saw the future in a lucrative future in horse racing. He also talked about Carol Heiss, the ice skater who grew up in where he grew up or spent his earliest years at Ozone Park, Queen. And they're just moving stories about her mother was dying of cancer, but she went to Europe as she was competing, and on and on. I mean, I really hope that I'm going to do, more written work about this because he also talked about, oh, here's another thing. Bobby Fischer was competing in chess, and this is why I think he's important because he wasn't just one of these nudges and whiners saying the old days were better. He talked about here's Bobby Fischer, a great talent in a really wonderful sport, chess. Why don't New Yorkers send him good cheer to Moscow and uh, and give him the cash so he can go there. He also, in like 1960, is when Branch Rickey's Continental League was about to die, but it was still a possibility before the 60 season started. He said it was going to work. And that by and he said by 65, there'll be three leagues, and then he even went off, and by 1980, there will be a international world uh, baseball tournament under the aegis of the United Nations. So I mean, but what happens though? I mean, the radio gig doesn't last much longer, and he moves to Rhode Island in 1962. I believe because his wife was seriously ill, and that the ocean would be a better place for her. And that's when I met him at the veterinarians, a few years later. Uh, he is around. Fordham has a Hall of Fame. Sports Hall of Fame opens in 1971, and he's there. Vince Lombardi is honored posthumously, and that broke up because Vince was Vince was what 53, I think, or 57 when he died in his 50s. Jack Coffey, who had played a little bit in the major leagues and became a baseball coach and AD at the Fordham, he was inducted at the same time. And he just, by the way, got into the new College Baseball Hall of Fame that'll be outside of Kansas City, and Frankie Frisch is not in it. Uh, but he goes up, and his wife, though, dies in 71. He he dies. I mean, he remarries in 1972, and then in the winter, early or midwinter 1973. He's at the meeting of the Veterans Committee in Florida. And by the way, his book that he did in 1962 is dedicated to the Hall of Fame. Uh, he he was a stubborn Dutchman, as Dizzy Dean called him. He had arthritis that sometimes cost him games and managerial games, but he didn't accept anyone's ride, and so he drives by himself from St. Petersburg, and on that afternoon in February of 1973, he loses control of his car. It hits an embankment, and he's got so many injuries that he never recovers. And what's eerie as Giant fans, both Mel Ott and Carl Humble died in automobile crashes. I mean, Frisch lasted over a month, but I don't want to end on that note. I want to have him remembered as somebody who gave his life to the game, loved the game, and loved to talk baseball with young people. And one of them, by the way, was Barbara Ott, who told me that when he was back with the Giants broadcasting and Ott was still managing in 47, he taught her how to score a baseball game. So that's how we should remember him, but also think of what legacy he left. And so I'm going to have a little sip of water, and I'll be glad to take any and all questions.
That was fabulous. But Lee, before we take any more questions, I know Ann Enos is here. You wanted to talk about this picture.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Ann Enos was such a help for my book on scouting. Frank Frisch was managing the Cardinals. This, in fact, his last full year. This must have been 1937. And her father had just come back from, he'd won a prize for selling the most sporting goods subscriptions. So he went to the All-American Baseball Academy in Hot Springs, and the word came, the Cardinals were interested in signing him, but he was underage. He was still a high school student. But they told him to report to the Cardinals when they were playing in Boston. And there were injuries to the first baseman, including Johnny Mize. And it wouldn't have been legit, but he was prepared to go into a game when the the word came, no, we have someone else to play first base.
Thank you, Lee. Lee, fabulous. Your background on everything is just superb. I got one comment and two quick questions. You know, when he was when I was growing up, I didn't know much about him. I learned as I was getting older and getting more acquainted with the game. But I did remember my father always saying, "Oh, those bases on balls." So that's where I remember him first because of my father remembering him. So I think you mentioned you did this research because you just feel he was really left out and not as reported on as, a lot of the other Hall of Famers are, correct?
Yeah, right. It's fascinating how um, what gets you deep into something. I can't quite place it, although I know he was proud to be considered a Ricky man. And one of the problems with the only published memoir he did it with Roy Stockton, who was a Braden man and not a Ricky man. And so, and I know Ricky's flaws. I mean, he's the foil in my first book, But the older I've gotten, and the more I see what the Players Association is about, especially from their founder, I come to appreciate these people who loved the game and gave their lives to it, and so yeah, and like when he talked about Pepper Martin, I mean the past was so alive in Frisch. And like in one of those little modules for radio, the regional radio, 1960, he talks about, Pepper Martin broke down. He loved to play so much, but he didn't take great care of his body because he wanted to win so much, and so he broke down. In fact, for my Ricky biography, I interviewed Pepper Martin's grandson, who told me that his fatal injury was he's playing a softball game on his property where he built a lake and he invited all the kids in to swim. And so they're playing a pickup softball game, or maybe it's hardball. He slides into second, gets his knee banged up, and he doesn't get it treated, and that's kind of led to his death at the age of 60. But it's still they gave their lives, and they also knew how to have fun. It's his One of the things he did in his later years, or after the managerial career ended, or actually when he was managing bad teams, he got into it with umpires. And I mean, there should be great footage of. He claimed, and I think he's telling the truth. He only picked on the umpires who were good, and the fights he had, or the famous Norman Rockwell painting "Game Called by Rain," which has Clyde Seuforth in it, but it was inspired. But what Ricky did when he was managing Pittsburgh, the field was a mess, and he comes out holding an umbrella. And he gets thrown out for that. And that was Beans Reardon, who became a friend. He also, with Bill Clem, Clem was telling Frisch, if you cross this line, you're gone. And so Frisch starts running around the infield into the outfield because so he doesn't have to cross the line. But he didn't hold grudges either. So I mean, the humor of Frisch was also attracted to me. I mean, Ricky had humor, but he was also, he was Protestant. I mean, and Frisch was Catholic. I don't know if that's the difference, but he knew how to have a good time, and of course he lived well. Uh, I mean, the linen business was very good. Um, and but
My,
yeah,
I'm sorry. My other thing is a quick parter. His Hall of Fame plaque, the hat is empty. In your eyes, what should it be, and which one do you think, if he was alive, he would prefer?
it's a very given that he tried to compromise on the Medwick situation, he might either have accepted it or done a halfway, because he um uh, he or he might. It's hard to say. Um uh, since he was a New Yorker, the uh, he might put it on, but I can't really give you a good answer. But I'm glad that you're asking me this, because I forgot to mention that when I was doing the talk, I found out there is a audio that I bought of a David Susskind show from 1964, before the World Series, and on this is a panel. Uh, Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, Charlie Finley, Keith Morris from Sports Illustrated marketing department, and Frisch holds his own with all these people. In fact, he's saying in '64 that because he attended all, yeah, as I say, he dedicated the book to the Hall of Fame, and he always went to Hall of Fame um, events in old timers days, and he made the comment that if the Giants might not have left if they had built parking underneath the polo grounds. So, I mean, he fascinates me because, I'm kind of a complicated person, and he is he's complicated, but in a very passionate and to me warm way.
Thank you, Lee. The man with the voice, Dan Taylor.
Lee, fantastic. I expected nothing less. This was terrific. Thank you for doing it. Gary, thank you for setting this up. Two quick questions for you, if I could. The first, as you well know, baseball scouts, managers, GMs, historically going back, have really held college guys in disdain. Did Frisch have a lot of issues because of that? Was he badly treated? And the other question is, what was his relationship like? You, as the author of one of the great baseball books, the award-winning biography of Branch Rickey, for those who don't know, what was the relationship like between Frisch and Rickey?
Well, very good questions, and certainly the first one I can say definitively it was not easy being a college guy, and I think the fact that McGraw was his made him the captain. I mean, that made it a little easier. But they had the falling out. They also reconciled. I mean, McGraw. There was part of McGraw that wanted to make him manager, but St. Louis wasn't going to give him up. As far as his relations with Rickey and Braden, that's a very good question. I think that Braden didn't like firing him, but he was looking at the bottom line, and St. Louis was the smallest metro market in the National League. Maybe Cincinnati was slightly um, uh, bigger or smaller, but they had Crosley there, and Braden had made a lot of money, but he didn't want to spend it. So I think that Rickey admired Frisch, but I don't think they were particularly close. And I think too that uh, the falling out between Rickey and Braden started in the late 30s, right around the time Frisch was about to leave. So I don't think there was any great closeness there. But what he admired about Rickey was his commitment to excellence. So I hope, it's so hard because they were closed-mouthed, I mean, they really talked to the press, and of course Rickey would say things and it would get twisted and it would get deeper and deeper, especially with O'Malley.
Thank you, Dan. Harvey Weinberg.
Lee, first of all, I want to thank you because you made me laugh. I haven't been doing much laughing lately, and that was good.
Well, one of the scouts, if you and of course Rick, Frisch too. I mean, you have to laugh every day. I mean, and so thank you. In fact, so go on with the question. I don't want to.
Well, actually, the biography that Gary distributed about that you wrote, you talked about growing up a Giants fan, but rooting for the Dodgers when they would play the Yankees in the World Series. Me too. I want to give you a brief vignette that happened to me in 1981 at Yankee Stadium. The Yankees were playing a playoff game against the Brewers. I went to the game wearing my orange and black that I'm wearing now. And between around the second and third inning, I went to visit a friend of mine who was working for the Yankees back in a VIP area behind Section 1 of the old Yankee Stadium. I don't know if you remember where that was. It was right behind home plate. I'm sure you do. And I walk into this room. I walk into this room, and there I see Pee Wee Reese. There were two people in the room, Pee Wee Reese and me. And I could see he's looking at the orange and black hat. And I start by saying, because the only thing I could think of, I said, I hope you're not offended, Pee Wee. I'm a Giants fan. And he said, no, it's kind of good to see how long has it been. And then the two of us were doing arithmetic, trying to figure out the distance between 57 and 81. So I have a brief conversation with Pee Wee Reese, and he tells me that he had visited the Yankees before the game in their dugout, and they were talking about how many World Series the Dodgers had won as opposed to the Yankees. And of course, the Dodgers had only won one in 55. And he then did an imitation that was spot on of Yogi Berra, lording over him that he had like 8 World Series wins or some crappy thing like that. So at one point I said to him, the conversation, this whole conversation was 5 or 10 minutes. And then I said to him, because I couldn't think of anything else, I didn't want the conversation to end, but I said, who do you think is going to win this series? And this is what reminded me of a time long past. Pee Wee Reese drops his voice, looks around the room. There's nobody else in the room. And he kind of pulls me closer to him and he says, I hate to say this, but the Yankees. And what he was hearkening back to was a time when I was a kid and he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and Giants fans would root for the Dodgers during the World Series time.
Well, it's National League.
Yeah.
And you know the interesting stuff about Frisch McGraw, the stories of the hatred. Well, you know that, and I did give that example about, dressing at the Polo Grounds before they play at that other ballpark, Yankee Stadium. But McGraw and Griffith, that's scheduled with the Senators and the Giants, exhibitions in Florida in Frisch's early years, or maybe even in his earliest years, and they got into fights. They had to call these games off. And that was a and the thing about Frisch that needs to be stressed is that interleague play started for the first time in the 59-60 off season. And there he is making these commentaries on regional radio. So it's great. We need some change. But up until not long ago, there was that vicious rivalry between the two. But all this stuff about the business gets a little bit complicated because the what Manfred is trying to do, and what he's done, is that it's now the NFL. Excepting instead of 17 games, it's 162 or two. It's absurd, but that's what we have. So there's no longer a league identity. But they carried it in the old days to a rivalry that was violent. But they call it hardball for a reason, right?
Thanks, Lee.
Oh,
Thanks, Harvey.
it's a
Norm
pleasure
Coleman.
talking. Yeah.
Lee, thank you so much for your presentation. It really was excellent. I do want to point out one thing about the Dodgers and Yankees, and that is ever since John Roseborough attacked Juan Marichal, I've never rooted for the Dodgers against the Yankees in the World Series. You reminded me about Frisch being on the old timers on the Veterans Committee, and that reminded me that the Veterans Committee elected a fellow Millbraeite, George Kelly, to the Hall of Fame. And I believe Frisch was on that committee. Do you have any insight into the influence he had in getting George Kelly into the Hall of Fame?
Well, I think that's part of the reason why he's been dismissed. And I think he's gotten a bit of a raw deal on this because, as I say, from the moment he got into the Hall of Fame and he liked the idea of the Hall of Fame, he was pushing. He had all kinds of ideas. He wanted a committee to nominate people for the Hall of Fame, and then a committee of 24, 16 writers and 8 players chosen by the commissioner to actually elect them with 75% of the vote. He also pushed, now this is in the 60s, he was pushing for the hall to do something about Hall of Famers who are alive who are not doing so well. Like I mean, he may not have liked pensions, but he wanted something to be done. But then in his last years on the committee, he had a great influence because the history was so alive to him. And so people think that a lot of the Cardinals and a lot of the Giants that he got in were marginal. But he was a great advocate. Like Ross Young's only played 9 years, but he would say that if he hadn't died so young, he would have challenged all of them in terms of stats. So his influence was great, but boy, uh, the other parts of his life are really so don't should not be a eclipsed. And to get back to Dan Taylor's question, and where I got this thought that he might have accepted either what it was blank or a split giant cardinal. On that 64 tape, they asked him, Susskind asked him, well, who's going to win the World Series? He says, well, or who's going to win? Well, I'm a Cardinal, I'm a Cardinal guy. And so he mentioned that, so, but I just think he's a remarkable personage, and I'm glad I can bring him back tonight, and I'm doing something with Saber about this too. So I'll put some on the blog. I mean, this has been a nice month for me because I'm going to be talking for Saber on a week from Saturday afternoon. And then also there's going to be the showing of 42 with Harrison Ford and the late Chadwick Boseman in Stanford at the Public Library on the 24th. And then there'll be a panel discussing that, and I'll be on it with two other historians. So it's nice to talk about this stuff again because my naive expression, if this exciting and meaningful history existed once, uh, it can't happen again.
Thank you, Norm. Does anybody else have a question who does not know how to use their yellow hand? Why don't we all, Lee? Fabulous. Let's all give it up for Lee Lowenfish. Lee, why just articles? Why not a book if you have all this
Well,
great information?
I mean, if you've done a book, and I've done a few, you have to. I mean, I'm closer than ever before because I love this stuff. In fact, it's that. Yeah, but if you haven't done a book, it's like it's the closest thing that a man will ever come to carrying a baby. So really, and if I'm so glad for the forum, he had, that and I want to credit and thank Cassidy Lent for opening the archive of Frisch that I didn't know of, a lot of unpublished stuff, and Saber's Jacob Palmrenke for clippings, and I want to close. Frisch really fought with, I don't know if it was depression, but he fought with, he couldn't understand people who didn't want to win as much as he did. And so whenever he found who could balance that with laughter, uh, here's a poem he had in his archive, and written by Herman Hickman, who was the Yale football coach who died very young in 1958, the age of 47. And he was a media person at times too. And I think this is a good way to end. Give me a mind that is not bound, that does not whimper, whine, or sigh. Don't let me worry overmuch about the fussy thing called I. Give me a sense of humor, Lord. Give me the grace to see a joke, to get some happiness from life and pass it on to other folk.
Very
Thank you
nice.
so much.
Very
Lee,
nice.
thanks again. Let's give it up for Lee Lowenfish. We will return
you, Lee.
next Thursday with Dennis Snelling again, talking about the Whiz Kids and the Giants in the 1950s. I'm going to shut the recording off. Anybody wants to hang around for a little, talk about that team. You know what I'm talking about. But anyway, have a great week. I know it's a Tuesday. Make sure you remember tomorrow's Wednesday, not Friday. And take good care. We'll see you next week.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Lee.
much. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Lee.
Lee.
Good night.
Night.
Good night. Lee, you mentioned, Lee,
All right, I'm still here. Go ahead.
real quick,